it's sort of like the soccer kind of thing.
Yes.
What it is.
Okay, let's welcome back from recess, back to session for the school board. For directors like here, Director Ding is at work, teaching as well, so at university. So this is back in session at 12:02. And we've got a presentation from the board of directors talking about what it means to run and serve as a school board candidate for Mercer Island. We've got a presentation that we've made that we will bring up and talk through. There's the opportunity for other directors to share their experiences running on the board and serving on the board. As well, we'll take questions from any members of the audience. Finally, on the board docs site, which talks about this, are a number of other documents that give you information about serving on the school board, the legal guidelines, when the filing dates are, and when primaries and final elections are. So all that is up there. There are 5 seats on the school board. 3 of them are up for election. On Mercer Island, all seats are at large, meaning the entire island votes for each of the 5 seats. This time it'll be 3 seats. You pick a seat to run in and you stay in that seat. You don't, after filing date, you don't move around, so you just kind of pick a seat. Anything else before we get started on the presentation?
Just real quickly, sort of mechanically, I think, you should check yourself. The King County election guide is particularly helpful in terms of the calendar, as well as like requirements for PDC, public disclosure of filings, as well as information statements for like a candidate statement. The primary, if there's more than 2, there'll be a primary, because there's only 2 seats, 2 people go forward for any 1 seat for the general election. The primary is in August, the general will be in November. But the King County information statement for candidates, I think, is very well worded, and has a host of useful information. It's maybe a 30-page PDF, so I would definitely check that out.
And then the terms start in December, so they run the December to November. It counts as 1 year, and so all the reshuffling takes place in December.
And it's a 4-year term.
Okay, Andrew, do you want to bring up the PDF and let's go through this. So let's see, without reading everything, I think we've got a wonderful school board, we've got a wonderful school district, we've got great administration. There are certainly some challenges ahead of us. We've got some significant challenges in terms of right-sizing our budget, right-sizing to enrollment, many decisions like that. But this isn't a crisis management situation. We've got a beacon school district that kind of leads King County, leads Washington State, in great aspirations from our parents, from our students. And we want to keep that going and running smoothly and running well in a very collaborative environment. So what does the board do? We adopt the budget, we monitor the superintendent against goals. There are a variety of legal definitions around this that we follow through board policy. These have been grown and cultivated across the years, so there's a lot of traditional history around the way we do things here, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be that way forever. It has and continues to evolve and get better. Another key part of the board is placing levies and bonds on to voters and bringing that forward. In 2029, the middle school and the high school will expire, so we have to think about how do we move that forward and think about what else we want to do, continue the middle school, rebuild an elementary school, all with the conscious thought around how enrollment and budgeting and all that is going on in place. So we've got a long-range facilities plan that is working in progress now and has recently started to help us make that work. And so that's where we currently sit. I'll turn it over to other board members in case they want to add anything.
I think just overall, in terms of being on the board, one of the hardest questions as a candidate, I think, to get is what do you want to do? And, you know, the board is very high level, sets policy. You know, my thinking is if you're a one issue person, there's one thing that you want to change. The board is not typically the right place to do that because we're overarching over the entire district. Not that you can't have passions, but just in terms of operational, we stick with policy and let our superintendent run the district. And he is our only employee. We only, I mean, we speak to other people, but he is the only one that we can legally and do give direction to. So, you know, when I look at, you know, why you want to be on board, you know, it's looking, for me, it's looking at, you know, what are your values? What's your approach to education, you know, kind of holistically. And then being able to use the budget and the vision, values, and mission in order to hone that for our superintendent to make day-to-day decisions.
Let's move to the next slide. Becoming a board member. So the key thing is a resident of Mercer Island and you're registered to vote in Washington State. We also have a clear conflict of interest policy. It starts out with we shouldn't be employed by the school district in, you know, prior to election as individuals. These are some of the requirements. As board members, we file with the PDC financial disclosures, really, again, about it's about conflicts of interest as well, but that's regularly filed. We declare a candidacy with King County for a 4-year term, as spoken about earlier. This is May 15th to May 19th. This is kind of the time you pick a seat and declare your candidacy. As Dan mentioned, there's a primary election around August 1st. If there are more than 2 candidates for a seat, filing for a single position, with the general then in November 7th. And as Fred had mentioned, we take our seats in December, the first meeting in December, and we serve till November, and then it's the next year.
There is the opportunity, I would check on the exact dates for the ability to withdraw. If one has second thoughts after declaring, that's a pretty short window. It's either at the end of that week or like maybe it's the following Monday to declare, like to withdraw a declared candidacy. But to know that that is an option and it's a very narrow window. And then you will be on the ballot even if you're not running an active campaign.
Okay. Let's move to the next slide. So, as Deborah alluded to, the way the board works, if anybody who's been on a corporate board or a nonprofit board, we are effectively volunteers, elected volunteers. So we don't micromanage. There's a real way that you work through the superintendent in a collaborative fashion. It takes 3 votes of the board to be able to ask for something to be done. But many times, really, the role of a board member, you know, either you are coaching the superintendent, the district, other board members, or you're supporting an action, or you're directing. And directing means you're forcefully making a change that's different from something arrived in a collaborative fashion. Those are really the 3 things you can do. The last is probably the least frequently used. There are clearly, as we know, there are much better ways to work as a group and as a collaborative organization than that. So, and that's how we have an excellent working relationship with the superintendent. No decision that the board makes is done on a whim. This is just too complicated to be done that way. There's a lot of nuanced data to be understood. And then actioning something with a staff of 400+ people, it's a very big ship to be able to change and turn, that it takes us time to do that. And we have to maintain great relationships with all our stakeholders. This includes our union, our school leaders, our PTAs, our parents, and community members. 2/3 of the community don't have students in schools, yet we have to be accountable to everybody.
I was just gonna say that I'm sure there'll be a slide later down on, I know that there's a slide later down on what the board members' responsibility is, but just to look at it in this context, all of those good relationships, come with a certain amount of work attached to them. So for example, like the working relationship with the superintendent, so he meets 1-on-2, so him plus 2 board members on a regular basis, because any meeting of 3 or more board members is a legal meeting of the board and must be noticed as such, and must be open to the public. So in order to have the board members have a chance to speak with each other more directly and with the superintendent, that's, a relationship that is kind of like an ongoing commitment. And then the same thing, like the stakeholders we meet with as a board in public, we meet with MIEA, we meet with, school leaders, we meet with parents, we meet with, the PTA council, that kind of thing. And even like the collegial working relationships with fellow board members, we have study sessions all the time where we had one last year about like policy governance, for example. And those study sessions are like 3 or 4 hour sessions where we, which are also, public meetings, but where we can kind of like narrow in on one topic and we don't make decisions, we don't cast votes during those meetings, but it's to like educate us as a board. So each of those things just comes with time and commitments attached to it.
And I will echo the time and commitments statement again. What we have to spend time reading board packets. You have to spend time attending meetings at each school, attending the study sessions, to be effective and to be thoughtful and to be able to make good decisions where we're impacting 4,000 students. It takes time and thought and nuanced understanding of the work in front of us. Let's move to the next slide. So policy governance, there are many ways that boards interact with superintendents, or boards interact with CEOs or executive directors. Some you can do micromanaging, and some like us, we've got a much more formal policy that makes it more approachable for different members to coming into a board, knowing that you work as a decision-making body that has 3 to 5 members voting on something that changes, and then knowing how to allow highly paid experts to be leaders and to be able to do the work they need to do in their schools, in the district. And so policy governance allows those boundaries to be clear so that both groups can know what to do and have good expectations of each other. So policy governance is what's in our board document. It's the set of rules that we follow. Legally, we say upfront what we're going to rate the superintendent on by Washington state law. That's in policy governance. Washington state law also says that the board is the one who hires and fires the superintendent. Nobody else. Everything else is the responsibility of the superintendent. So this leads us to focusing on boards, focus on the larger issues. Boards have a clear delegation of authority with clean boundaries through this governance model. And then we have clear expectations of the superintendent, and we have clear evaluation of the superintendent to those expectations. They actually happen throughout the year. So it's not a one-time surprise in November or August or something like that. It's throughout the year we're evaluating the superintendent. And our policies clearly state rules around how that happens. And then finally, we evaluate the entire system as to what is accomplished and how we set goals for them to achieve. Any other?
Yeah, I would say like, I mean, the only thing is one, in terms of what policy governance is, you ask 5 people, you'll probably get 5 or 6 slightly different nuances when it comes to what formally is within policy and what becomes administrative. And then 2, there's some background legal requirements that are arguably non-policy, that are non-delegable. Such as course materials have to be approved by the board. Certain programs have to be annually approved by the board, and whether those are considered policy or not, legally, those are issues that the board votes on.
I think, we like to live in a world of gray, as much as policy governance is that black and white and there's clear boundaries, like what they both were saying is, we kind of live here, not here. And, it doesn't mean that you don't have an opportunity to share your voice and your vision with the superintendent in meetings and, in shaping that policy and shaping the operations. But it's the decision making. And so I think what's key, and, maybe some of us do look at it different, but with policy governance, yes, the board has to approve the curriculum and the board has to, approve instructional materials. But it's really relying on our experts to bring those to us, to say, here's the process we went through, here's how we chose that. If we're not approving it, there's a problem between the board and the superintendent's relationship. So if that makes sense. And so, yes, it's something that the board has to do, but it's, it's, I don't want to say it's rubber stamping, because you're working along the way with it and watching the process as it goes. But if you're getting to the end of that process and aren't approving it, there's a problem. So I don't see as much of a conflict with policy governance, because there's a lot of board interaction with the superintendent during that process. It's just the ultimate final approval.
Yeah, I very much echo that nuanced thought around this. We've got the long range facilities committee that's working now to figure out right size our schools, right? Figure out what we need to update in our schools, how would we launch a new bond or levy. But this is a multiple months long process, helped and facilitated by experts with clear, guidelines. As things change, perhaps those guidelines or the requirements of that committee can be updated. But then when we get to the end, hopefully we're all on the same page about what the expectations were. Have we gotten the right information from that committee to make a decision that we needed to make? So clearly there's been many opportunities along the way to collaborate, course correct, update,
Pause.
yeah. Let's move on to the next one. So these are the rules of engagement. We've got values, vision, and mission that we worked with the superintendent to create over time. That are shared throughout the school district and is really about students being the priority. We've had 5 student-focused fundamentals. These are the baseline that we have expectations across our entire district. It's anything from academics to social emotional learning, as well to understanding and cultivating a culture that welcomes and understands diversity and all its nuances. So many issues around that. Our operational expectations include things like communication, how we have goals with each of the schools, how we manage our budget. Again, as it speaks to here, we have created, they're fine-tuned, iterated upon, monitored, so it's never a one and done type of situation. It's always evolving. Same with the superintendent relationship, and same with the governance process. Even our governance process has evolved over time. I'll give Fred a few minutes to talk about this, because this is the boundary for the group, so we should hear directly from.
Sure, just, I think one of the most important tenets that's not listed, but that we work with each other is, at the end of the day, that there aren't any surprises. That I never want any of the 5 members who are on the school board to be surprised by something in the community, and whether or not that's because of something that happened in a school, or maybe some information that's gonna come out and hit the Seattle Times. You know, I take a lot of pride in making sure that I communicate with them proactively, and whether or not that's in my weekly updates to them or in the moment. And then the same is true for them. I mean, there are times when they have information, and so they'll send it to me or ahead of a meeting. And I think it just goes to this whole piece of, it is really a relationship between the board and myself. And that's why we have the 2-on-1 meetings. That's why I update them weekly with updates at the table, because there's definitely research out there that supports a operating school board has a direct impact on student achievement, and vice versa. We all know that the most important, or the one that impacts students the most, is the teacher, followed by the principal, and then in there is where does that board really come through? And so I think we've benefited from that, certainly in my 14 years in the school district, from having boards who work really well with superintendents. And you know, we continue to push one another and think about the thinkings, but it all goes back to the students, and ultimately, what is the experience we all want? Not what the superintendent wants, you know, not what any one board member wants, not what any one principal wants or teacher. It's really all of us in thinking about where is that. So I work really hard to help execute on the values, vision, and mission, and that's what we're doing every day in the classrooms. And then coming back and checking in with this group to say, are we delivering on it for the community in the way that you feel like it should, because you're the representatives of these 4,000 students.
Yeah, so if I could just, I think monitoring, if one looks back at board meetings, that's where a lot of the substance is at a policy governance level is what data are we monitoring that shows that we're on track for achieving the goals that we've set out to achieve. I think at a high level, if one looks at the fundamentals in our mission statement, it's aspirational, it's broad. I think very few individuals are going to take issue with the way in which it's phrased. And even if there were to be tweaks one way or the other, the ultimate question is, how do we make sure we're achieving that? How are we monitoring these fundamentals in an appropriate way that makes sure that we're delivering the education that we're, the best education possible? So I would focus it, like my advice is in particular is, what does it mean to monitor, and to think sort of like deeply about that in terms of, what, ideas, we could possibly be doing differently, as a board and as a potential candidate.
I think a great example of this in terms of monitoring with operational expectations, some are easy and no-brainers, is the superintendent ensuring that we're fully insured to protect the district, both in people and in facilities. That's kind of a no-brainer. You have it or you don't, and it's enough or it's not. One of the things that I think the board does have a lot of ways to, I don't want to say power over, but persuasion is perhaps with the budget. So there's a couple different ways. The majority of our expenses are people, our staff, and we set parameters during bargaining. The board doesn't participate directly in bargaining, but we say we meet with the superintendent and the bargainers, the people doing the bargaining at the table, and say, here's the range that we're comfortable going to based on the budget and the numbers, and they present their advice to us. The other thing is, as salaries have risen a lot in the last couple of years, as they should have, the board created a policy of not that our ideal fund balance was between 6 and 8%.
8 to 10.
Sorry, 8 and 10%. If we go below 6, then there's certain steps we have to take during that time that we're below the 6%. And I'm probably not quoting it right, but my point is that helps. That gives, the big parameters, and that drives the policy decisions for the superintendent to make the individual choices. We're not going in and saying, we're saying, you know, our staff is vitally important, but this programming still needs to be in place. And you can't take your entire budget and spend it in one way or another. And we're also not going and saying, you know, you need to spend $26,000 on, you know, art supplies or whatever like that. It's the really big picture stuff, but it really does shape the vision, and we use the values, vision, and mission in order to do that.
Okay, thank you. Budget remains a big piece for us, so it's very complex and absolutely right. You know, I will say that going into COVID, we learned the value of fund balance and keeping money in reserve for these type of, I mean, this was much more than a rainy day. Working through those issues in conjunction with the board, how do we spend down into that? Working with the board into how do we take a loan against it to help keep staff going and help keep small size schools that are safe. COVID really changed a lot of things with what was important, but at the same time, because we had these policies and fundamentals and operational expectations, we didn't lose sight of the checklist that had to work no matter what sort of environment we were in. We had to make sure that we had high academic standards, we had social emotional learning for our kids. We were still concerned about harassment and bullying and intimidation and all those other things that could possibly happen while ensuring a safe learning environment, following all the CDC and Washington state health guidelines and redoing bargains with the teachers to make sure we can reopen schools safely. So keeping both sides in balance, what's important as well as what's urgent and kind of the acute issues of the moment are what these rules have allowed us to do in so many ways. Let's move to the next slide. Oh, a few rules of the road. Yeah, actually, that was a slide we want to be on. Sorry, yes, you perfect. Thank you. Board speaks with one voice. We don't. The whole idea is collaboration. It takes 3 out of 5 votes to do it. It's not bad when it's 5 out of 5, especially for decisions that impact the whole community. We have to learn how to be united and uniform with one voice. If we're going out with a levy or going out with a bond, even making superintendent selections and things that are very, very material. We have to understand how we have come together as one voice. One voice, you know, there is the possibility that you can end up the minority leading in these ways, but hopefully everyone joins the board with best intentions, view of trust, and a view of collaboration with best intentions to get to a good end goal. Clearly we don't agree every time. I think many leaders have said, you know, bring all the disagreements, have all the discussions on where we disagree, where we don't see eye to eye. Those discussions have to be aired. They have to be talked about. But then when you make a decision and a decision is locked, everybody follows the decision.
Disagree but commit.
Disagree but commit, yes.
It's also worth noting that only the current president of the board literally speaks on behalf of the board, like answers questions from reporters or replies on behalf of the board if someone has emailed the board with questions, that kind of thing.
Although, as long as it's clear and there's not issues with the Open Public Meetings Act, any board member, you know, it should be encouraged and is free to speak as an individual board member with members of the community. And I think at times in the past, amongst some, there's been perhaps like a misconception about that role.
And each board member serves with a school district and a principal advisory committee, various other committees. You might serve on committees with the city, committees, diversity committee, student committees. And each board member can carry the voice of the board in those cases too. And then board members, we trust them. Board members, they develop certainly a view of trust amongst each other, and that's the best way to operate. Board members are very frank about when they're carrying, you know, a board policy or board decision we've made versus personal opinion, and there's no shying away that personal opinion and goals and direction, again, about airing ideas, airing good thoughts, airing disagreements, and then committing to a decision. Everything we do plays into that. But hopefully, once we've committed to a decision, we're not undermining it as well. You know, that doesn't serve anybody. Let's see, board is not involved in any board directs the what, so that's the goals, but not the how. The operations come from the superintendent. We're not involved in any personnel decisions. We don't go around picking and choosing people to fire or hire. That's up to the superintendent. And then usually everything that comes before the board, there's a lot of different RCWs that apply to boards. We certainly have legal counsel, whether it's Erin from district or private counsel, depending on how conflicts of interest work. We have that to help us, but in many cases, it's up to board members to be thoughtful, make sure they are non-conflicted, even when making decisions about between district and parent, and lots of other things come to mind. Any other thoughts? And I think this was the final page, was on time commitment. I'll let other board members speak to time. Depending on the roles you have, it's very, very different. I think the role, Maggie Ty went through a role where we were hiring and searching for a superintendent. I think that was 100 hours a week. But and certainly for board members might have been 20 hours in some weeks. So that could be hard, but you know, we don't get to choose when these things happen. So sometimes you have to be ready for that. So that's one. Certainly during COVID, issues come up that are, you know, not exactly what you wanted to spend in. You decided, I want to run for school board to bring computer science into the school system. COVID made you change your mind very quickly that maybe social emotional well-being of our students, reopening our schools, the health guidelines, all that came into play. So you, as board members, we have to pivot, we have to be flexible. I think typical on a board week, you could easily expect 10 hours on a board week between this meeting and staying up to date on the materials that we have to cover. Beforehand, asking questions of the superintendent if needed, 10 hours on a board week.
I mean, as an officer, I think that's, I kind of tell people 10 to 20 hours a month if you're not in the leadership, and then when you are, it's more like 10 to 20 hours a week. Then during, I'm sorry, yeah.
Board meeting week, which is about 20 hours, 2 meetings a week, yeah.
And so, no, that's on the high side, I think. I had the pleasure of being president during COVID. So that was more like 40 hours a week, and diving into all sorts of things that we've never done before, but that's not normal. So, I think what's important to note is, you know, some of us work full-time, have, you know, day jobs, some of us don't. We all have different responsibilities. Some have jobs that are more flexible than others. I think it's, you know, I just take days off when I'm doing things like this. I have the flexibility in my job to do that. I think it's, you know, really important to be able to be as present as possible during these things. We know, well, we know in August when things are happening. So, you know, not all jobs allow for that, but it is, you know, making a commitment that, you know, site visits are important, and you know, being present at the schools. It's not often, but I mean, we have 3 site visits a year. But I think those are, and one of the things that I think most of us enjoy the most is being in the classrooms and seeing what's happening there. So, you know, it does require a little bit of flexibility, but otherwise we arrange everything around our schedules, other than our Thursday night meetings that are the second and fourth Thursdays of the month, and then our study sessions we're able to schedule around our individual schedules and things like that. So there's some things that have a lot of flexibility, and then there's a couple of things that don't have as much, but those are few.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes it easier is that the schedule is made up at the beginning of the year. Pretty much like you will know when all the board meetings are for the whole year. You can put those on your calendar. So there are sometimes changes. So for example, this year we've chosen to move to starting our meetings at 5 o'clock on Thursdays instead of 6 o'clock. That was a pretty big change because it kind of cascaded throughout the whole year. But in general, like the schedule's pretty fixed at the start of the year. And then as far as like the committee assignments and stuff goes, we tend to defer to the person with the least flexible schedule. So whoever's the least flexible schedule kind of gets their choice of committee assignments, because again, we know at the beginning of the year well, actually we do that part in December, but we know when the different principals advisory committees meet and so forth, and then we go to the next least flexible person and so forth. So it's manageable, but I think that a lot of people that think about running for school board think, 2 meetings a week, 2 meetings a month, like how bad can it be? And that's certainly what was in my head, was like, 2 evenings a month, I'm certainly happy to, serve in that capacity. But I think the reality of like a lot of daytime meetings and a lot of meetings that are like 3 hours here, 2 hours here, 1 hour here, like it's just, it's been a much more active role than I realized it would be.
And one of the things in terms of the timing, we had talked about the term runs from December to November, but our fiscal year for the school district is September 1 to August 31. So when we're talking about adopting budgets or setting a calendar for the year, that all has to be done before September 1, because once you hit September, it's on kind of the school year calendar. So they don't sync up perfectly. But when Director Tucker's talking about we set the calendar, that's from a September through an August cycle.
And I think with that, we're at the end of our slides. So if any questions or any discussion you'd like to have, please feel free.
Oh, I want to just add one more thing about the calendar, which is I did not realize until I was being onboarded for my board role that the calendar has like a whole like sort of internal structure to it, so that we pick up certain operational expectations at certain times of year, that there's the budget has to be looked at this point, and then at this point, and then this is final approval for the budget. When I was attending school board meetings as I was thinking about running for school board, it seemed completely arbitrary to me, just like, why are these items on this agenda tonight? And so if you look at the calendar, which is viewable on board docs, if you can poke around a little bit and look at the schedule for the year, you can see this sort of pattern, and that it just helps to kind of have that as a framework.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I would say, I would encourage like every candidate to speak with as many like current and former school board members as possible. Like we'll just get the lay of the land, ask questions of whatever like the interview questions are. What was most surprising, in terms of your expectations versus the actuality? What do you think the most important aspects are? I'm sure like each of us could probably talk like anyone's ears off. But I think also like a really good source of information to be sensitized to what at least other people perceive to be the most significant aspects, and then to sort of like think about, one's own candidacy, where one would lean in and sort of fit in within that picture.
I just, being a candidate running for public office is, I don't know how many, well, Dan and I both have had contested elections, and frankly, I hate it. I don't know how he felt about it. It's just not my thing. It's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to serve. I didn't want to run. I know that it's somewhat political, but I don't consider this political personally, because we're looking at, I guess it sort of is, but I don't look at it that way. They're really separate, I think, skills and interests. And I think, kind of just knowing that a lot of people are scared off by the political process, but I would just encourage people, if it seems like serving on the board is your passion, to kind of, and the political process is not just to kind of suffer through. Unfortunately, it's a means to an end, and there is a lot of support out there. you know, being a candidate, especially in a small community, I mean, it's not easy. You know, people are doing background checks on you and talking about you without knowing you, and, you know, it's kind of miserable, but, you know, if you hopefully have a little bit of thicker skin or disengage from those social media sites, makes it a lot easier, but you know, those of us who have been a part of it are I know are happy to give advice on, you know, our experiences, and everyone's is different, but there's groups out there that provide training and support for running for public office.
Yeah, like I would echo what Deborah said. I did not enjoy the candidacy part, at least certain aspects. I mean, I think on the positive side, you know, hopefully, and I hope this will be the case for anyone who decides to run. There's always the opportunity for the focus to be on the issues, and the substance, and really sort of what comes before the board and how one would make a difference if one joined the board. And I hope that for everyone, who's considering running, who then does run, to keep that in mind, that I think ultimately is what will give us the best board, and not be distracted by sort of more peripheral political gamesmanship.
And one thing that makes that very challenging is when people, you know, when we go out and talk to people about, you know, the schools and what they want to see, they're interested in operations. They're interested in how your own child is impacted and what's there, what opportunities does your child have. And so, you know, and then we start talking about policy and high level stuff. And so, you know, it makes it really hard. There's just no question. As, you know, people would say to me, what do you want to do? I'm like, support our kids. Like that was kind of my answer. Yeah, there can be little specifics and, you know, I believe in this and I believe in this, but we're not the ones running that. And so anyways, it makes the campaigning when it's not issues difficult. So just want to acknowledge that.
Okay, I don't have a question because you did a fantastic job running through the presentation today. And my one question was about the time commitment, which you saved for last, which was very helpful. I just want to compliment the team here on a couple of things. One, we mentioned COVID, what an incredible challenge that was for everyone associated with that to navigate and bring the kids back into school. So big hats off to everybody for that effort, very successful. Both my kids go to West Mercer. They love going to school. And last night, I think you were there, Fred, they had the choir. I was just blown away. That was so wonderfully done. So really just thank everybody for what you're doing and thanks for making this time available.
Okay, thank you very much, all. There are no other questions. We will adjourn this meeting and at 12:44. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you in next board meeting. I hope as our candidates.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.